Hello again, everyone. In the first video, I tried to provide you with an outline of the book of Revelation that would allow you to see it from above, as it were, and tried to detail some of that outline a little bit for you. In this second video, I want to dive with you a little bit deeper into what I mean by the book of Revelation when I call it a book of prophetic visions. I talked about that a little bit in the first video when I told you that the words I saw occur 45 times in the book of Revelation. And it is indeed those words I saw that help explain the genre of prophetic vision. I want to talk with you a little bit more about that. John is commanded, as you remember, in the proposition of the book of Revelation, to write what you see. That's what the risen Christ says to him. In Greek, the word see is the word eidon. It means in English translation, I saw. It occurs 45 times in the book of Revelation. What that means is that Revelation is a book full of prophetic visions, as are many of the books of the Old Testament prophets. The frequent occurrence of eidon, though, poses some interesting and important issues related to the contents, the structure, and the message of Revelation, in much the same way as it does for the prophetic books of the Old Testament. For those words I saw are common in those prophetic books, especially books like Daniel or Ezekiel or Zechariah. Some of the issues involved with seeing and prophetic visionary literature are how to differentiate between visions. And so in the book of Revelation, one of the issues is how many different visions are there in this prophetic book that we call Revelation. Another issue in Revelation is how many different scenes belong to each vision. For a vision can move from one place to another, from one time to another. And so one of the issues in the book of Revelation concerns the number of scenes that belong to each vision. A third issue in the book of Revelation concerns how the visions are meant to be related to one another. I want to think with you about all of those questions as we continue to think about the visionary nature of the book of Revelation. One of the most obvious features of Revelation are the three large prophetic visions, each one containing 7 scenes that are found in chapters 6 through 16. And again, you may want to pause the video at this point and take a look at those chapters if you don't recall these 3 large prophetic visions. Most people, however, do. They are, the 3 visions are the visions of the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls. And each of those 3 large or major visions in the middle of the prophetic book of Revelation contain the words I saw in English translation, or in Greek, eidon. In the 7 seals vision of chapter 6, 1 through 17, and chapter 8, 1 through 6, that word eidon is found 7 times. And I've listed those 7 occurrences for you in the script. They're in chapter 6 in verse 1, verse 2, verse 5, verse 8, verse 9, verse 12, and then again in chapter 8 and verse 2. In the 7 trumpets, the vision of the 7 trumpets, the word eidon is found 4 times. In the vision of the 7 bowls, in chapter 16, the word eidon is found once. So in total, the word eidon, which occurs 45 times in the book of Revelation, is found 12 times in these 3 large, or what are usually referred to as major visions of the book of Revelation. That means there are 33 times when the word eidon occurs outside of the visions of the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls. Often interpretations of Revelation treat the visions that are not part of the 3 large visions as what are usually called interludes. But there's no reason to do that other than the length and the repetitive quality of the visions of the seals, trumpets, and bowls. In fact, even those qualities are not unique to the 3 visions of the seals, trumpets, and bowls. And in some cases, the interludes prove to be as long or even longer than those 3 visions, and at least as repetitive. With that in mind, what I want to do is dig a little deeper into the structure of Revelation using the words I saw and survey the visions of the book of Revelation that stand between the proposition in 119 and the peroration, or the conclusion of the book, that begins in 22:6. In doing this, I want to try and highlight for you what the prologue or the title of Revelation says the book wants to do. For all of the visions in Revelation are given, the prologue says, to show the servants of Christ things that must happen soon. Let's survey the visions in the book of Revelation. There's first of all a vision of the risen Christ that exists within the transition of the first part, the epistolary part of Revelation. There's a vision of the risen Christ, and he speaks the words that become the proposition for the book, that explain its contents, its themes, and its purpose. And so the vision of the risen Christ begins a series of visions that are related to the present. And those visions begin in chapter 2 and verse 1 with visions that are visions of the risen Christ, of 7 churches in Asia Minor that John is familiar with and that probably are familiar with John. Those visions begin in chapter 2 and verse 1, and they continue through the end of chapter 3 in verse 22. And then there is another vision, a vision of God's throne room in heaven and of the one who is worthy to open the scroll. These are the visions of Revelation chapters 4 and 5. The vision of the risen Christ in the 7 letters in 2 and 3, the vision of God's throne room and the one who's worthy to open the scroll in that throne room in chapters 4 and 5. In both of those visions, the word Adon occurs more than once. And these are visions of the present, as I told you when we looked at the outline. Following those visions, the next visions that we find are visions 3, 4, and 5. Vision 3 is the vision of the first 6 seals being opened on the scroll. And the scenes that take place as these seals are broken are found in chapter 6 and verses 1 through 17. This is the part of the book of Revelation that shares a great number of characteristics with Jesus' apocalyptic discourse, or it's sometimes called his eschatological discourse, Jesus' discourse about the end of the age that's found in Matthew, in Mark, and in Luke during his final week in Jerusalem. Adon occurs in the vision of the scroll in the first 6 seals repeatedly. And then there is a vision of saints from Israel and all nations in heaven in chapter 7. And that's the 4th vision in the book of Revelation. The 5th vision is a vision of the 7th seal in chapter 8 and verse 1. Following these visions, which are visions of what, not what is, but what is to come after what is, visions that have to do with the future as opposed to the present. Those visions begin with 3, 4, and 5. They continue with the next set of visions. Vision 6 in the book of Revelation is a vision of angels blowing trumpets, 6 angels blowing 6 trumpets in chapters 8 and 9. The 7th vision is a vision of a mighty angel and a little scroll. It begins in chapter 10 and verse 1 with the word Adon, and I saw. The 8th vision is a vision of the temple in Jerusalem and the city, the holy city, and 2 witnesses that bear witness there and what happens to them. This vision is found in chapter 11, verses 1 through 14. Then the 9th vision of Revelation is a vision of the last angel blowing the last trumpet in 11:15 through 19. That's followed by the 10th vision, a vision of a woman, a child, a dragon, and a war in heaven in chapter 12. The 11th vision of Revelation is a vision of a beast rising up out of the sea in 11:1 through 10. The 12th vision of Revelation is a vision of a beast, but this beast rising up out of the earth in chapter 13. The 13th vision of the book of Revelation is a vision of the Lamb and of 144,000 in chapter 14, verses 1 through 5. The 14th vision is a vision of heaven and an announcement of judgment that begins in 14:6 and continues through chapter 15 and verse 4. The 15th vision of the book of Revelation is a vision of 7 angels who are told to pour out 7 bowls. This vision is recounted for us in chapter 15, verse 5. That's where it begins. It continues until it ends in chapter 16 and verse 21. Then comes a 16th vision, which is a vision of Babylon and the fall of Babylon. This is a lengthy vision. It begins in chapter 17, verse 1, and continues through chapter 19 and verse 10. The 17th vision is a vision of heaven opened, and a white horse and rider emerging out of heaven, and a final battle between that rider and the angels and the forces of evil. That vision is recounted for us in chapter 19, verses 11 through 21. There's an 18th vision. It begins in chapter 20 with verse 1 and the word Adon. This is a vision of the binding of the enemy of God, the great Satan. In the 19th vision of Revelation, in chapter 20 and verses 4 through 10, we find a vision of thrones, of judgment that takes place, of a resurrection, a first resurrection, and a reign of Christ on the earth. The 20th vision of the book of Revelation is of a great white throne and a second judgment, a final or last judgment in chapter 20, verses 11 through 15. And finally, the 21st vision of the book of Revelation is a vision of a new heaven and a new earth, which begins in chapter 21, verse 1, and continues through chapter 22 and verse 5. These 21 visions form the book of prophecy that lies in the middle of the book of Revelation. And there are then, as I count them, 21 separate visions contained in this prophetic book. Only 2 of them lack an occurrence of the word Adon somewhere inside them, at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. The 2 visions that lack the word Adon are the vision of the woman, the child, the dragon, and the war in heaven in chapter 12, and the vision of the temple, the holy city, and the 2 witnesses in chapter 11, verses 1 through 14. In each of these 2 cases, the visions may be separate scenes associated with previous visions, but I believe a strong argument can be made for treating each of these as distinct visions. I'll leave you to look at them yourselves and decide for yourselves. But in either case, I hope I've been able to lead you through Revelation in this second video in a way that shows you how the structure of the book can best be understood. In the next video, we'll dig a little bit deeper into the introduction.